The Hindenburg disaster is one of those tragic, horrifying, and iconic moments in history that sticks out, similar to that of the Titanic disaster. Both disasters led to their own differing levels of controversy, scandal, and intrigue that have lasted all of these years later. Today we are going to get into the Hindenburg and the legacy it leaves behind. The LZ-129 Hindenburg, also known as Luftschiff Zeppelin 129 and registered as Delta Lima Zulu 129, was a German commercial passenger-carrying rigid airship, the lead ship of the Hindenburg class, the longest class of flying machine, and the largest airship by envelope volume. A rigid airship is a type of airship in which the envelope is supported by an internal framework, rather than being kept in shape by the pressure of the lifting gas within it, such as in blimps and semi-rigid airships. She was operated by Deutsche Zeppelin Reederei and made 10 trips to the US in 1936 without incident. After opening the 1937 season by completing a single round trip to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in late March, the Hindenburg departed from Frankfurt, Germany on the evening of May 3rd, leaving on the first of 10 round trips between Europe and the US that were scheduled for its second year of commercial service. American Airlines had contracted with DZR to shuttle passengers from Lakehurst to Newark for connections to airplane flights. Except for strong headwinds that slowed her progress, the transatlantic crossing of the Hindenburg was unremarkable until the airship attempted an early evening landing at Lakehurst 3 days later on May 6th. Although carrying only half its full capacity of passengers, meaning 36 of 70 and 61 crewmen, 21 of which were trainees during the flight accident, she was fully booked for the return flight, which would never happen. The airship was hours behind schedule when it passed over Boston on the morning of May 6th, and its landing at Lakehurst was expected to be further delayed because of afternoon thunderstorms. Advised of the poor weather conditions, Captain Max Pruss charted a course over Manhattan Island, causing a public spectacle as people rushed out into the streets to catch sight of the Hindenburg as she passed overhead. After passing over the field at 4 p.m., Pruss took passengers on a tour over the seashore of New Jersey while waiting for the weather to clear. After being notified at 6:22 p.m. that the storms had passed, Pruss directed the airship back to Lakehurst to make its landing almost half a day late. As this would leave much less time than anticipated to service and prepare for the airship for its scheduled departure back to Europe, the public was informed that they would not be permitted at the mooring location or be able to tour the Hindenburg while it was in port. This turned out to be a blessing in disguise. If you're enjoying this video, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know down in the comments section. Around 7 p.m. Eastern, at an altitude of 650 feet, the Hindenburg made its final approach to the Lakehurst Naval Air Station. This was to be a high landing, known as a flying moor because the airship would drop its landing ropes and mooring cable at a high altitude, and then be winched down to the mooring mast. This type of landing maneuver would reduce the number of ground crew, but would require more time. Although the high landing was a common procedure for American airships, the Hindenburg had performed this maneuver only a few times in 1936 while landing in Lakehurst. At 7:09 p.m., the airship made a sharp, full-speed portside turn to the west around the landing field because the ground crew wasn't ready. At 7:11 p.m., it turned back toward the landing field and valved gas. All engines idled ahead, and the airship began to slow. Captain Pruss ordered aft engines full astern at 7:14 p.m. while at an altitude of 394 feet to try to brake the airship. At 7:17 p.m., the wind shifted direction from east to southwest, and Captain Pruss ordered a second sharp turn starboard, making an S-shaped flight path toward the mooring mast. At 7:18 p.m., as the final turn progressed, Pruss ordered 660, 660, and 1,100 pounds of water ballast in successive drops because the airship was stern-heavy. The forward gas cells were also valved. As these measures failed to bring the ship in trim, 6 men were sent to the bow to trim the airship, and 3 of them would die in the accident later on. At 7:21, while the Hindenburg was at an altitude of 295 feet, the mooring lines were dropped from the bow. The starboard line was dropped first, followed by the port line. The port line was over-tightened as it was connected to the post of the ground winch. The starboard line had still not been connected. A light rain began to fall as the ground crew grabbed the mooring lines, blinking, sprinkling rain from their eyes as they peered upward at the bottom of the airship. At 7:25 p.m., a few witnesses saw the fabric ahead of the upper fin flutter as if gas was leaking. Others reported seeing a dim blue flame, possibly static electricity or St. Elmo's fire, which is a weather phenomenon in which luminous plasma is created by a corona discharge from a rod-like object such as a mast, spire, chimney, or animal horn in an atmospheric electric field. This was just moments before the fire on top and in the back of the ship near the point where the flames first appeared. Several other eyewitness testimonies suggest that the first flame appeared on the port side, in front of the upper fin being, quote, mushroom-shaped. One witness on the starboard side reported a fire being lower and behind the rudder on that side. On board, people heard a muffled detonation, and those in the front of the ship felt a shock as the port trail rope over-tightened. The officer in the control car initially thought the shock was caused by a broken rope. At 7:25 p.m. Eastern, the Hindenburg caught fire, and she went up like a Roman candle. Eyewitness statements disagree as to where the fire first started. Some say it was on the port side, with yellow-red flames first jumping forward to the top fin near the ventilation shaft of cells 4 and 5. Other witnesses on the port side noted the fire actually began just ahead of the horizontal port fin, only then followed by flames in the front of the upper fin. One, with views of the starboard side, saw flames starting lower and aft near cell 1 behind the rudders. Inside the airship, helmsman Helmut Lau, who was stationed in the lower fin, testified hearing a muffled detonation and looked up to see a bright reflection on the front bulkhead of gas cell 4, which, quote, suddenly disappeared by the heat. As other gas cells started to catch fire, the fire spread more to the starboard side, and the ship dropped rapidly from the sky. Although the landing was being filmed by cameramen from 4 newsreel teams and at least one spectator with numerous photographers also on scene, no footage or photographs are known to exist of the moment the fire began. Remember, the Hindenburg is filled with very light and highly flammable hydrogen gas. If you aren't aware, hydrogen is the first element on the periodic table, meaning it is the lightest as its atoms only have 1 proton, 1 neutron, and 1 electron, the rest of the elements having more and more from there. It is even lighter than oxygen, which is the 8th on the periodic table, and that is what gives it the buoyancy it has in air. However, hydrogen is highly volatile when mixed with fire. Hydrogen reacts extremely fast with oxygen to release tons of energy, has a very wide range of concentration in air that can ignite, and requires extremely low energy to spark, making it highly volatile and easily triggered by static or sparks. The flames from this hydrogen fire quickly spread forward, first consuming cells 1 to 9, and the rear end of the structure imploded. Almost instantly, 2 tanks, either water or fuel, burst out of the hull as a result of the shock of the blast. Buoyancy was lost on the stern of the ship, and the bow lurched upwards while the ship's back broke. The falling stern stayed in trim. As the tail of the Hindenburg crashed into the ground, a burst of flame came out of the nose, killing 9 of the 12 crew members in the bow. There was still gas in the bow section, so it continued to point upward as the stern collapsed down. The cell behind the passenger decks ignited as the side collapsed inward, and the scarlet lettering reading Hindenburg was erased by flames as the bow descended. The airship's gondola wheel touched the ground, causing the bow to bounce up slightly as one final gas cell was incinerated. At this point, most of the fabric on the hull had also burned away, and the bow finally crashed to the ground. Although the hydrogen had finished burning, the Hindenburg's diesel fuel burned for several more hours. In the face of this catastrophe, Chief Petty Officer Frederick J. Bull Tobin, in command of the Navy landing party for the airship and a survivor of the crashed American military airship USS Shenandoah, shouted the famous order, quote, "Navy men, stand fast," to successfully rally his men to conduct rescue operations despite the considerable danger from the flames. The time that it took from the first signs of disaster to the bow crashing to the ground is reported as 32, 34, or 37 seconds. Since none of the newsreel cameras were filming the airship when the fire first started, the time of the start can only be estimated from various eyewitness accounts and the duration of the longest footage of the crash. One analysis by NASA's Addison Bain gives the flame front spread rate across the fabric skin as about 49 feet per second at some points during the crash, which would have resulted in a total destruction time of about 16 seconds. Some of the duralumin framework of the airship was salvaged and shipped back to Germany, where it was recycled and used in the construction of military aircraft for the Luftwaffe, as were the frames of the LZ-127 Graf Zeppelin and LZ-130 Graf Zeppelin II, when both were scrapped in 1940. In the days after the disaster, a board of inquiry was set up at Lakehurst to investigate the cause of the fire. The investigation by the U.S. Commerce Department was headed by Colonel South Trimble Jr., while Hugo Eckener led the German commission. Are you wanting part 2 to this story? Make sure to check out my other channel, Shipwreck Sunday, for part 2 tomorrow night.